Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to take you through very quickly synopsis of the report that I prepared for IEAR. And I suppose I'd like to say, first of all, that I've always had a huge interest in the SME sector and the contribution it makes to the Irish economy. And 2 or 3 years ago, SME owners started to talk to me about the whole commercial rates issue. And in my mind, it is something that had been gathering momentum over the last couple of years. And then we had the initiative in Wexford, the uprising there earlier this year, which has grown now into a national movement. And I'm delighted to be involved with it. And I think it's absolutely an issue that's essential for government and the authorities to address in a meaningful way quickly. So just to take you through the report. I mean, first of all, I suppose I spoke and I speak regularly to a lot of SME owners around the country in a lot of different sectors. For example, I've spoken to an awful lot of people in the pub trade over the last 12 months, in the tourism area and so on. And identifying what the key issues for the SME sector at the moment, I think it's all fairly obvious stuff. The economic environment that they're operating in at the moment, there's been an absolute collapse in domestic demand over the last couple of years. Between January 2009 and August 2011, we had over 4,000 business insolvencies registered in the country, and most of those would have been in the SME sector. Cost competitiveness is always an issue because during the Celtic Tiger years, we obviously let the cost base of the country get totally out of control. Access to credit is a huge issue. And I have to say, personally, based on my anecdotal experience around the place, I don't believe the sort of statistics we're getting from the banking industry about the availability of credit. Ireland is in the middle, and particularly the SME sector is in the middle of a classic credit squeeze. There is no doubt about that. It's a huge issue. Late payments, I suppose that's always a problem, but it becomes more of a problem during difficult economic times. And the state sector is a key culprit in that regard. Bureaucracy and red tape, regulation, licenses, compliance, etc., big issue. Commercial rents, obviously an issue because we've seen a lot of debate about the upward-only rent reviews. I have to say, personally, at an aggregate or a macro level, I don't see commercial rates as a huge issue in the sense that the figures are showing that in many cases commercial rents are actually adjusting to the changed economic realities, despite the existence of upward-only rent reviews. So I don't think it's the biggest issue at this point. It's a problem, but it is not the biggest problem. The biggest one, in my view, at this stage is the whole local authority commercial rates and other charges situation. I suppose the reality is that over the last 3 years, and I suppose this is the positive thing that comes out of a recession, it gives you an opportunity to reform the way you do things, to get your cost base in order. And an awful lot of business costs have actually adjusted to the recession over the last 3 years. Wage rates have fallen very substantially. Professional fees, in many cases, are coming down. Commercial rates, as I said, have in many cases adjusted to the changed economic realities. However, the one area that there's been absolutely no flexibility whatsoever, and in fact, I've come across businesses over the last 3 years that have seen a 60% collapse in turnover, and the commercial rates bill has actually increased. I mean, that is an utterly ludicrous situation. The ARVs up across from from local authority to local authority. The increases range between 2000 and 2011 from 32.4% to 74.8%, with an average increase of 57% over that period. And over that period, consumer price inflation increased by 32.8%. So the growth we've seen in ARVs is well ahead of the growth of most other costs across the economy. Water and commercial rates accounted for 27.2% of total local government or local authority expenditure in 2006. That figure in 2010 had jumped to 30.2%. Over the same period, central government funding went from 31.8% of total expenditure in 06 to 24.5% in 2010. What that's telling us is that as central government cuts back on funding of local authorities, the business sector is being forced to take up the slack. So the business sector is effectively subsidising the cutbacks in central government expenditure and local authorities that's happening. And to me, given the business challenges and the economic challenges out there, that is an utterly ridiculous situation, and it's an utterly unsustainable situation. Within the report, I look at a number of countries around the world in terms of how they do it, and if you want to go to bed tonight and read the detail, please feel free. But I think the one clear message that comes across is that, you know, Ireland has a much more centralised structure than many other countries, which means that local authorities and at a local level, there's a much weaker level of revenue raising powers than in many international countries. For example, across the world, domestic property taxes actually form a key part of revenue for local authorities. Against that sort of background, you know, what are the options? And I've spelled out 8 options. Some are interrelated, but I think the solution to this problem has to contain an element of these options. I mean, John mentioned that one of their key objectives, and I would 100% agree with that, is that the right to appeal a rates valuation based on economic conditions and an ability to pay should be an essential part of the operation of local government and the operation of business. The funding of local authorities must become more broadly based, and it obviously needs to reflect changing economic and business circumstances. And in that context, the UK system is an interesting template. Okay, the small business lobby groups in the UK complain about commercial rates and local authority charges, but relative to what we have here in this country, it is an infinitely better system, and we should certainly, our policymakers should be looking much more closely. And I suppose the key feature of the UK system is the ability to negotiate based on changed circumstances and ability to pay. That's absolutely essential. We need to see greater collaboration between local authorities and business and the various representative bodies for business. At the moment, you know, I get the very distinct impression, I think it's the reality, that local government is up there at one level and does not interact with business other than to make the demand for the annual commercial rates bill, and then if that commercial rates bill is not paid, to follow it through the court system. You know, there needs to be a lot more interaction there. Another possibility, the international norm is that generally one local authority per 250,000 of the population. You know, that seems to be the international norm. In the case of Ireland, we have one local authority per just under 135,000 people. So if we moved from 1 per 135,000 to 1 per 250,000, it would represent a reduction in the number of local authorities from 34 to 18. Conservatively, and it's difficult to estimate the cost savings because it depends on how it's done and the efficiency of it and so on. But I would estimate conservatively that you would make savings of 1 billion. You know, and if those savings were passed directly back to the business sector, it would have a huge impact on the health of the business sector. The Local Government Efficiency Review Group a couple of years ago identified savings of 511 million through rationalisation of local authorities. I would be calling for something much more radical than what they were suggesting. But if that 511 million in savings, if 50% of that were to be passed back to the business sector in the form of lower commercial rates, it would represent a 19% reduction in the commercial rates bill at an aggregate level. So it just shows you, relatively small amounts of money, the difference at a national level, the significant difference they can make to the business sector. Another, option there is to put local authority funding on a sound footing. In other words, you spread the revenue raising powers of local authorities. So property tax, water charges, ring fencing a portion of VAT as it relates to a certain area. These are all possibilities for actually broadening the revenue base for local authorities. Maintaining central government funding at this stage, I think, is absolutely essential. And what's been happening, as I've demonstrated, is that as central funding has been declining, the business sector has been taking up the slack in the form of higher commercial rates. Further reductions in central government funding to local authorities, if they are to happen, I don't think they should happen, but if they were to happen, well, the business sector obviously cannot be forced to take up the slack for that again. Another option, and this is one that's interestingly in the UK over the last couple of weeks, UK water companies have started to issue bonds again, reflecting global bond market conditions. But if we were to set up a semi-state water company in this country with access to global capital markets, that would represent an alternative source of funding for local government. And obviously, the savings made should be passed back to the business sector in the form of lower water charges, for example. So those are the options. As I say, I think the solution is a combination of those things, but it shows you what's possible. I'm sure there are people in the room that will come up with 10 different options, but based on the international experience, based on the economic realities, these are the issues that I think our policymakers need to be looking at. So the conclusions, business is being forced to carry a never heavier burden for running local authorities. In my experience, and surveys and anecdotal evidence suggest to me that thousands of businesses are on the verge at this stage, and the question of survival or not is on a knife edge over the next couple of years, given the economic backdrop. The commercial rate system must be reformed immediately to cope with that situation. And I think, very clearly, if reform of the commercial rate system does not happen, we can definitively say that thousands of jobs will be lost across the economy. So if government is serious about a jobs initiative, and to me, the success or failure of Ireland's economic policy, the success or failure of the Irish government's programme for government will be determined by one thing 3 or 4 years down the road. That's employment. That's the bottom line. So I certainly have identified, and the members of IEAR and those people who are signing up in the petition on a daily basis recognise that, if the commercial rate situation does not change, the unemployment situation is going to get a hell of a lot worse. So I think the stakes are extremely high, and I wish IEAR the very best of luck in their campaigning. I was going to say over the coming years. I think it's a much more immediate problem that it's over the coming weeks, because its action is needed immediately. Otherwise, thousands more jobs will be lost. Flexibility, reform, absolutely essential for small business and for the overall economy. That's it. It's a quick synopsis. There's 40 pages or so in the report. As I say, take it to bed tonight and read it. Thank you very much indeed.